All right, in this video, we're going to talk about quadratic equations again, but this time we're going to look at a different form. We're going to look at standard form. So our topic is going to be, quadratic equations in standard form. Quadratic equations in standard form. All right, so what is this standard form? What is that all about? So that's what we're going to take a look at. So what is our objective? What is it that we're trying to accomplish by this video? What should we be able to do by the time the video is over? So very simply, we're just going to graph the quadratic equations in standard form. So we should be able to graph quadratic equations in standard form. All right. So what is a quadratic equation? Let's talk about that real quick. So quadratic equations. Well, let's see here. Quadratic equations. What are they? Well, they have a couple of properties. Okay, one property that they have is, I'll say property number one. Okay, one property that they have is that they take the form of a parabola. We talked about that in the last video. Take the form of a parabola when graphed. So they have the graph of a parabola. Okay, so this can look like different things. So it can look like this. Sound effects help. It can look like this. It can look like this. And the arrows imply that it goes on forever in any direction. So they're basically, parabolas are like U's. They're either right side up U's or upside down U's, but they're U's and they can be anywhere, and they could be anywhere on this graph. And all three, the ones that I drew, do not have two places where it crosses the x-axis. So it kind of depends where it's located. This one has 0 places where it crosses the x-axis. This has 1 place where it crosses the x-axis. This has 1 place where it crosses the x-axis. And I could draw another one here that looks something like that. And this actually crosses x-axis in 2 places. So we look specifically at the cases where it crosses x-axis in 2 places, but it's also possible that it crosses at 1 or 0. So not all parabolas have 2 zeros. That is not a property of all parabolas. But not a property of all quadratics. But all quadratics have the graph of a parabola. That's one of their properties. Another property is that there are always 2 x's in the graph. Okay, there. And what do I mean by that? I'll tell you what I mean by that in just a second. There are 2 x's in the graph. I kind of put that in quote because I'm not clear what I mean by that. There are 2 x's in the graph. And so let me show you what I mean by that by telling you what standard form is. Standard form looks like this. Y is equal to ax squared plus bx plus c. And so what we see here is right here, x is squared. And that's what I mean by 2 x's, is that x is squared. And so in factor form, which we talked about the last time, there are 2 separate x's that are kind of multiplied together. So even though in the form you didn't see the x squared, but if you multiplied it out, you would have seen the x squared. So there are 2 x's in the graph, and I kind of more meant the equation. The equation and graph are kind of synonymous. There are 2 x's, okay? Not necessarily 2 zeros, but 2 x's. So you can see that we have an x squared. So we say that this has a degree of 2 because the highest power is 2. Okay, so when multiplied out, a quadratic equation will take the standard form. So when it's multiplied out, a quadratic equation will take the standard form. That's true of all quadratic equations. Okay, if it doesn't take that form, it's not a quadratic equation. So these are the two properties. One, it takes on the graph of parabola, and two, it basically takes on standard form when multiplied out. You get an x squared term. Okay, so maybe I'll put that in parentheses. An x squared term. Okay, that only happens when you multiply it out, though. So maybe I should qualify and say x squared term when multiplied out. Okay, so those are the two properties of a quadratic equation. And so what we want to be able to do in this particular video is to go from the standard form, which looks like this, and be able to graph it. Okay, so how do we graph it? So let's take a look at that. Graphing in standard form. Graphing in standard form. Well, one thing we just said is that all quadratic equations will take on this form when multiplied out. We also said that they will always look like a parabola. So somehow we have to get from that equation to parabola. And the way we're going to do that is that we are going to follow a series of steps. So the first step is going to be to find the vertex. And you're probably asking yourself, what's a vertex? Well, let's come back up here to these little examples that I created. You see there's always like a special dot there. That special dot is in fact the vertex. So this, these are all called vertices. So this right there would be a vertex. One is a vertex, but when you have more than one, they're called vertices. But these are all vertexes or vertices. I want to say vertexes, but they're vertices, okay? So a vertex is kind of like the most significant point of a parabola. It is the one that is either the highest point or the lowest point. And it is probably the most, the point that defines the parabola the most. So vertex is very important. So we want to find the vertex. So the question is, how do you find the vertex? Well, there's a little trick, okay? And the trick is, I'm just going to put a dot here to indicate that we are, actually, I think I want to stay in blue for now, to indicate that we are just doing one thing at a time here. And so to find the vertex, there is a rule, and that is that you can find the x value of the vertex by taking negative b over 2a. And then you can find the y value by plugging in x value. So find y by plugging in the x value. Now you're probably asking, where did negative b over 2a come from? Well, the answer is calculus. So if you want to continue in your math, which I encourage you to do that, you will find out where this negative b over 2a comes from by learning about calculus. Calculus gives us ability to find extrema, which is where it's the highest of a place or the lowest of a place. And so calculus gives us that little trick there. So once you find the vertex, the next thing is just to plot a couple of points. And then you're good to go. That's it. Find a couple of points. Let's erase that, couple of points. All right, so step one, find the vertex. Step two, plot a couple points. That's it. That's how you graph a parabola.